Hello, and welcome to today's lecture on symbols and meaning. Today, we'll be talking about the structure of reality in terms of a linguistic structure. And so, language creates a structure that not only mirrors reality, but brings a particular understanding of the material reality to existence. And so, let's first talk about language. Language is simply a system of signs or a system of symbols that work together to construct a shared notion of reality. Now, language is very important to communication because we share a common bond um, that indicates how we view the material world. And on a basic level or a foundational level, it works amazingly well. We look at things and point to material objects and describe them in a way that others can understand and comprehend. Chair, wall, ceiling, ground, floor, couch, cup, so on and so forth. Now, all of these symbols reference a material item. And oftentimes we are aware of that shared reference. Sometimes we'll use a word and reference something that other people don't understand, and then you have to define that word or describe that thing. But oftentimes we feel like we are aware of what that symbol represents. This goes so far that we don't even question what we mean when we deploy obvious signifiers or symbols. Right? We know what a cup is. We know what a chair is. We know what a couch is, even if we are not aware of the specific cup or the specific couch or chair being referenced. So, language is a system of symbols that work together to co-construct our notion of reality. But what are these symbols and where did they come from? They have a history and entomology, and we can go back and trace the ways in which certain symbols were used over time. We could even go back and trace some of their origins. So this is a Greek word, or this is a derivative of a Native American word that now means this, and so on and so forth. But really, there is no indelible, inherent origin of any symbol. Symbols are constructed by humans. And so they're shared. We agree upon their general meaning, but for the most part, they are abstract, arbitrary, and ambiguous. They're abstract in that they don't reference naturally, or there's no inherent connection to the word pen and the actual pen that I am holding up, right? It's abstract. The word pen doesn't look like a pen. And so it's abstract. If you might think of an abstract artwork or painting, if it looks like a tree and you say that's a painting of a tree, then it is usually not an abstract painting. Now, if there's squiggly lines everywhere and it's very organic, but it doesn't reference the image of a tree or depict a tree, but rather abstractly um, connotates a tree or represents a tree, well, then it is most likely an abstract work of art. We can imagine a tree or see a tree in it, but it doesn't depict the actual image of a tree. Words and symbols are arbitrary. They're picked out of a hat. Like I said, we can go back and discuss and describe a history, but at the beginning, a symbol is arbitrary. It's just randomly chosen and picked to reference what the thing that it describes. And so at some point, pen became the word, or lapis, or boligrafo in another language, Spanish, for example, that's used to describe this object, this pen. all of the symbols that we use for the pen are arbitrary. We could easily call this a what? We could call this a pencil. We could call it a flim flam. We could call it whatever we wanted to call it. And if we all agreed that by saying this word, you reference this thing, we would be able to move on in a shared system of symbols. Ambiguous. When I say pen, you don't know exactly what I'm meaning. Do I mean a pen that I use to write with? Do I mean a larger marker? Am I just saying the pen is mightier than the sword and I'm referring to communication in general, or a pencil? Right? And so it's ambiguous. You don't really know the parameters of the symbol in relation to the thing. Am I discussing a pen that actually works? Am I discussing a drawing of a pen? It's still ambiguous in its nature. And so we're already starting to get a little bit conceptual when we start thinking about symbols. Now, symbols stand in for something. And so they just give us a description of the territory. Now, the territory might be the actual pen or a feeling such as hope, freedom, or love. And what I'm feeling, what's inside me, that emotion is the territory. Uh, but the word sadness, happiness, joy, or love, right, is just a symbolic marker that stands in for the actual territory. Where is my pen? This is just standing in for the pen. Oh, there's the pen. And so the symbol stands in for the territory. A nice phrase from semantics is the map is not the territory. And so when I say I am feeling joy, that is not the territory. The territory is my actual feeling. Now think about how many feelings all of us have at any given moment. You know, it might be sad or happy or joyful or regretful or nervous, so on and so forth. There's many words and symbols that we can attach to feelings. But what about how we are actually feeling inside? This is an ineffable, dynamic uh, sensation that is almost impossible to describe. Ineffable. It is impossible to describe. And so every time we are using language, we're just using markers that fill in for the territory. And at the end of the day, all language is inadequate. Language can just never fully encapsulate the territory, or in this case, how I am feeling. We can get close and we can try our best, but these symbols are inadequate at the end of the day. And so it's just interesting when people say there is a miscommunication or a failure to communicate. And we say this when we don't think we are effectively communicating. But we shouldn't feel bad because in many instances, it is impossible to effectively communicate almost anything if we look at it in regards to how language is inadequate in describing the territory. And so we make a certain leap when we use symbols. Signs are a little bit more basic. A sign, as they say, where there's smoke, there is what? Fire, right? And so a sign is something that naturally occurs. It's a direct connection. And so when I see smoke, I start to look around and I am aware that there must be a fire somewhere. And this is a sign. And now that's a little bit different than a symbol. And so we make that leap from signs now to symbols. Symbols stand in for something. If I cried and a tear ran down my cheek, that might be a sign that I am not feeling well or that I am sad. Now, a symbol, right, can stand in for that feeling. And so symbols stimulate sensation. When I say I am sad, right? Or when I say I'm feeling joy, then that stimulates a feeling of melancholy or sadness in the audience. It stimulates a sensation of hope and love and happiness when I say positive words. And so, as Kenneth Burke notes, symbols or speech is symbolic action. Something is happening. It is an action. It is not just a inert, neutral form of symbolism that I am deploying. Things actually happen, and actions result from my words. And so, in that regard, using words and using symbols is to take action. That old phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, everybody might reply, is a bold-faced lie, right? We can heal if the sticks and stones are not too large, but from the physical damage. But words and symbols will stick with us for a lifetime and continue to harm us. And so the pen is mightier than the sword. The words can hurt and can uplift almost as much, if not more, than physical threats, coercion, or material rewards. And so by using symbols, we can affect change, and we are in fact, taking action. Language use and symbol use depends on convention. How do we use these words? How do we use these symbols? What language are we speaking? What culture am I situated in? What is the historical and contemporary conditions of the communicative act? And so we're constantly reading all of these factors and deploying terminology and using symbols that fit the situation. Think outside the box, we might often hear. An interesting statement, right? That is almost impossible to put into action, right? As if you are thinking outside of the box, you are aware of the box or the construct of any given situation. And so it is very hard to use symbols or to communicate in ways that are outside of the structure of any given situation. And so we're almost always depending on the convention established concerning our use of symbols and language. Meaning, as I like to say in interpersonal communication, the meaning of words are not in the dictionary, they are in people. And so the ways that people use words indicates their meaning. And they have a relational and a connotational meaning, meaning that these words and symbols have a meaning in relation to how I use them with other people. And so even if I just say, hi, how's it going? That can mean something in different instances, depending on the relationship. If I say, how's it going in the hallway to a colleague, that oftentimes doesn't mean how are you actually doing. Let's sit down and have a conversation about your well-being and your state in this instance. It usually just means what? Usually just means hello, hi. Rarely do you see people actually tell people how they're doing. Now, if I'm with a close friend and they walk up to me and I say, hello, so how is it going? And they say, hello. That would seem rude and out of context given the relationship. They would most likely tell me how they are doing as I am inquiring about their well-being in relation to our interaction and interpersonal relationship. And so words are in the relationship. Words and the definition of words are in people, not necessarily a dictionary. So behind me is one of my favorite models. Like all models, models are reductive. And so we're reducing some complicated ideas and theories into a simplified visual format. Language functions similarly. We're reducing a feeling to a model, and that model is the symbol or the word. And so the semantic triangle is a triangle, and there are three components. We have the object or the sign, the symbol or the signifier, and three, the thought or the signified. Now you can use other terms here for object. You might use thing or material. You might use the word territory, or you might use the actual thing. And so for here, the sign is the object, right? And this is the actual thing, the material reality. What could be more real than the real material object in front of us? In this case, we'll use the example of a chair. And so this is a chair, this is a sign, and we move to its symbol, its signifier. What is the symbol for chair? Well, it's the word chair. Not a drawing of a chair, but the actual word, CHAIR, chair. This is the signifier. Now, this signifies a thought in all of our heads of what we are materially representing, right? The actual chair. And the way that it works is there's a direct connection, as you can see behind me, from the symbol to the thought, and also from the actual object to the thought. But there is an indirect connection between the object and the symbol, chair. Like I said, we could use any word or symbol that we agree upon to describe a chair. We could call it a bear. We could call it a flop. And that would make just as much sense as the word chair if we agreed upon it. We could call the couch a chair and a chair a couch. Right? I could call the pen a chair and the chair a pen. So pick up a pen, have a seat, and get out a chair to write with. And we're moving on right along without that much disruption, even though we've completely changed the signifier or the symbol. And so this is a little bit of the conceptual nature of language and the philosophical notion of communication. And every time you communicate through language, you're taking a semantic leap from the material item into the conceptual sphere of the symbol or the signifier. Now, let me ask you a question. Since we're into communication and philosophy and truth in this lecture, which element do you think in the semantic triangle do you think is more indicative of reality? Which one is more truthful? One, the object. Two, the symbol or the signifier. And or three, the thought or the signified. And so what could be more truthful than the material reality? And so let's take a moment to put a number on which one you think has more of a truthful connection to the reality that we are trying to understand and describe. Many of us might say the object. The object is reality. There's a chair in front of me. I can feel it. I can touch it. I can see it. And that is where all of this starts, apparently. And so this is the most truthful. I'm aware that this chair is of a certain type, or if this chair is functional, or if it's broken. Number two, the symbol or the signifier, right, can be transported from place to place. I don't need a chair here to evoke the understanding of chair. I can just say it, which is such a philosophical achievement, to just go around and say things and reference entire realities that aren't there. Elephant, giraffe, spaceship, ocean, boat. None of these things are in the room right now, but we all have them in our heads because I just mentioned them. And so, such an imaginative and philosophical experience, the use of language that often goes overlooked in daily correspondence. And so, lastly, and this is where we end up, the correct answer is three, the thought or the signified. Now, when I say chair or when I say cat, what goes on in all of our heads? We all probably think about a different cat or a different chair. None of these cats or chairs are probably the same. We might even think of a cat, a tractor, or a kitten, a fluffy little kitten, or our particular cat. Or we might be allergic to cats, and we might think of the danger, and we might think of a hospital room because we're allergic to cats, and we might end up there if we get near a cat. We might think of some cool dude flipping a coin and sitting on the side of a curb, right? But we all have different notions of catness or chairness, and so this is where the philosophical part comes into play. Right? The thought or the reference or the signified helps us understand the ways material realities deceive us. Now, early philosophers sat around and looked at reality and thought reality and the materiality of reality is lying to us. And that's how philosophy began for the most part. We have to trust our minds and not our perceptions. If we watch the sun set, we might think, and early societies did think this, and early peoples thought this. What they think? They got fearful and didn't know that the sun would rise and come up the next day. Right? Why should it? We just watched it come down. Right? And so we don't know if it's going to come back up. But over time, people started to talk with one another, and we heard stories about generations and generations of the sun coming up and coming down. We saw eclipses come around in intervals over time, and we related that to generations and moved forward, and we became fairly confident that the sun would come up the next day. And why? Because we trusted our minds and we trusted our conceptual understanding of sunness, if you will, and not the material reality. And so we could all have a different conception of chair or cat in our head, but because we understand chairness, we will have a shared understanding of the way the world actually functions. We can understand that a chair doesn't even have to be a chair. I can just pull up a stump, or I can sit down on the floor, or I can sit down on a table, and that can function as a chair at that moment. And so the thought or the signified is the more truthful of the three, and that is why there's a direct line from the object to the thought and from the symbol to the thought, but an indirect line between the thought or between the object and the symbol. So we call this the signification. Signification, say it with me, signification, where we signify, we testify, we talk about our lives, and we talk about the material reality that we are encountering. And oftentimes we do this with pride, and we do this with confidence because we are bringing a certain reality into fruition. And if we don't describe it, does it even exist? If there's no word for it, does it even exist? And so that's a philosophical conundrum, what they call an aporia. It's really an unanswerable question, and that's where philosophy starts, with unsolvable dilemmas or aporias. And so signification is the way we bring certain realities into existence. And what is clear is that we don't just describe an inert or neutral reality, we bring into the world a particular value system that comes with every symbol. And so the process of using signs and symbols to represent things is signification. And when we use signs and symbols to represent things, we represent them in a particular way. And we present an entire value system that comes along with just a simple material reality. Now, if I said chair or throne or stool or high chair or beanbag, there's a series of values that come along with these objects and these material items based on their symbolic representations. They're all pretty much chairs, but they function much differently when we look at the structure of language. So now if we go back to a sign. Now, just the basic understanding of a sign is indicative of something that is coming afterwards, right? Like smoke to fire, or if you're at sea and you see a bird, then you might know that land is nearby, because that bird is a sign that land is nearby, just as smoke is a sign that fire is nearby. But now we might use a symbol of fire to mean something else, right? Something like lit or fire, a slang word that means something is good or positive. And so we might use this symbol to signify something entirely different. And you can just see that's an example of a symbolic word and the way words function according to the people that use them, and not necessarily in the dictionary. You're not going to look up fire in the dictionary and see positivity there. a car and a house might be symbolic of status and money, and money is a symbol for wealth and success in this society. In particular, kinds of cars and types of houses and locations of houses have certain connotations and meanings within society, which is constructed partially by the linguistic system we use to describe it. And so, flowing down here and moving to the end of this lecture, we might look at the lion as we look at a chain of signifiers. And the chain of signification means we can just go down the line and see any symbol and start to associate this symbol with different meanings. And so the lion is oftentimes a symbol of strength. And so you see a lion or the depiction of a lion, right? This, by the way, is not abstract. This depicts a lion. This is not the abstract word lion. But if I went from lion, the abstract word, to this image, we have similar connotations. This might be a symbol for what? This might be a symbol for strength, and it's often used that way. The lion is often used as a symbol for royalty, and so we see it on monarchy crests, and often associated with royalty. And so we see here the lion with a crown on his head, or her head, is a symbol for royalty or monarchy. Oftentimes, the lion becomes a symbol for nationality or a nation. And so we see the lion here, an Indian symbol used for nationalistic purposes. to note the strength of a nation. The Lion of Judah from Rastafarian religion and culture, often used in reggae cultures and music, right, is symbolic again of royalty, um, nationality, and cultural strength. The Lion of Judah. You might throw a beanie and some glasses on a lion, and now you are connotating and using the symbols not only of strength and power here, but some sort of contemporary hipster cultural notion of identity. The lion might grow their beard out and wear outdated apparel to profess their identity as they sip lattes or something. Simba here from the beloved Lion King might reflect your childhood or a more youthful, carefree existence before the power and the strength of the lion is declared. And so, to sum up, the chain of signification is followed through every time a symbol is deployed. You're having a conversation with somebody and they say a word, just one word, and you start thinking of all of these stories and events and movies and texts and conversations you've had concerning that symbol. None of these might actually be what the speaker is referencing, yet that's the territory that we enter, that conceptual philosophical territory when we deploy symbols and words. So thank you for tuning in. We're talking about the system of symbols and how systems of symbols reference a specific type of material reality, and we construct languages, and as we do so, we construct the worlds around us. Now, the world around us is changing constantly, and our languages and the language use and symbols that we use are also changing constantly. And so the lion oftentimes references strength and power or nation or the fatherland, oftentimes associated with masculinity. And so we can see that as we move to the power differential between language symbols, we can see that certain inequalities in society are also referenced through the use of language and symbols. And so, if the male is associated with a lion, and then we have the associations of strength and power, well, then you can see that that's a dominant signifier and positive trait that are passed over as masculine. Now, they are not. There's nothing natural about that. But what is referenced there is the inequalities between genders and sexes that we find in society. And so to value one term is oftentimes to devalue another term. And so we might think the opposite of powerful is weak. The opposite of strong is feeble. And if you are strong and powerful, then you are a leader, and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, their opposites are continually being subordinated by the dominant signifier there. So ultimately, we recognize this conceptual process in the use of all symbols and language, and furthermore, how language represents the material realities that we live in. And if we want to start changing reality, we can also start changing some of the words that we use and the connotations that we give to these words. Thank you very much.